And I tried to explain to him that of all the work that I did, the one thing I figured out, or that I fundamentally believe, is the thing that keeps people from being able to adapt effectively is.
Jim Grossman is the guy behind the guy. Most of you have never heard his name, and that's exactly how he's operated for decades, quietly in the background, helping some of the most accomplished people answer the one question that nobody prepares them for. Who am I when the career is over? Jim has walked it himself and has spent the years since helping athletes, special operators, and elite performers navigate reinventing themselves. Today, we get into all of it. The 3 things underneath every great career. Why Kobe Bryant is the modern blueprint for reinvention. And why joy might be the most underrated performance enhancer there is.
Welcome back to Unlimit Your Potential. I have a special guest today. This is my mentor, Jim Grossman. And so I've been looking forward to this opportunity to be able to, highlight you, because you're the guy behind the guy and no one knows who you are. They should know who you are.
Prefer it that way.
I know you've had your anonymity and used it to your advantage, but this is a great opportunity, so thank you for letting us in, and it'll be fun to be able to go through these stories that I know I've heard, but if you're okay, we'll put it on the record a little bit.
Absolutely. First of all, Seth, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm a big fan. So
excellent.
And the reason why I'm a big fan is because you're helping people, providing genuine value, solid advice that it takes to get through some challenging, circumstances. So
thank you.
I'm here.
All right, so I'm going to start at the beginning. We'll see where this goes. And you've been an athlete at the highest level. Mm-hmm. You've been first a football player at the university level.
Some people would argue that, but yes, I did.
You were you were out there on the field, and then you transitioned to baseball. And I know you've had great mentors and coaches as well.
Yes.
But you had to do the work. You also had to believe in yourself that it was possible. And you actually played at the highest level. You went and played in the major leagues.
So, yes. So the full turn of all of that was just basically, doing what every athlete has to do, which is kind of walk in, read the situation, creative problem solve in a way that enables one to adapt to first the coach and then the competition. And that's all the mechanics of what everything we've been talking about for a long time.
So when did you decide on baseball? You're playing football in college, and that's when you started to throw a baseball, or had you always been playing baseball?
No, and this for anyone that is probably younger than 30 years old, it's like trying to describe kind of a prehistoric time because it was so vastly different than what it is right now, and I think it's pretty funny because when I had the good fortune of growing up in Tucson, where there was really strong summer baseball. And then I had the incredible good fortune that Pat Darcy kind of took me under his wing and said, "Hey, you want to play baseball?" And I was like, yes. And it was that simple. And we threw in on a summer league. And, in a year and a half of really not much routine in baseball, I got an opportunity to play for the Cardinals. And then started in rookie ball, and as it turned out, I started our home opener. And if you're older than 30 by a bit, you can catch the irony here, but it was the idea of me standing on the mound as the starting pitcher. The only thing that was running through my head at the time was, if the ball's hit to my left, I have to cover first base. Which now, if you're a 6-year-old, if you don't do that, you're banished from the kingdom. So, it's a vastly different world. And, where it was more about just athletic ability than anything else.
Did you have to sort of like believe that it was possible at some point? Did you get that from your coach? Like, how did you develop to the point where you're playing in the major leagues?
That's such a great point, right? And along the way, you can't help but kind of come to understand what the fundamental makeup of an athlete is, right? And one of the things that I think that I'll take to my last breath is we're affective people. We feel. We have to believe it before we can see it, right? And the way, as a manager, particularly in baseball, but I think in any other locker room, clubhouse, dressing room, whatever you want, if your club loses the belief in your ability to lead, you're done. And that's the tipping point. And so the idea of, I had my career cut short because of an ACL injury at the time that was career ending. I was out for 2 years and then got another chance to come back with the Cleveland Indians. And to your point specifically, right, I literally was in a game trying to earn a contract, and I'm facing Canseco, right? One of the best hitters in baseball. And I'm literally on the mound. This time I'm thinking my out pitch was a split finger, and but if I was going to be conservative about it, I would have tried to throw him away someplace that he couldn't hurt me, right? And I literally was on the mound and goes because I knew what I wanted to do, right? And I got back into baseball because I wanted to figure out what is this ultimate paradox, right? Where us as athletes, the process that everything is built around is the process of mastery, right? And the idea that you cannot get to a D1 level or a professional level of sports and not be an absolute master of adaptation. And the paradox for me is, how is it that we as a body of people have such difficulty adapting to our last rep, right? And that's been fascinating to me. And so I knew what I wanted to do, and so I got back into baseball because I was really just doing research, trying to figure out what are people thinking about, what's going on here, right? And so I was literally on the mound and kind of practice what you preach, and I'm sitting there going it's like, what do I care? This is not going to be the end of me. And I threw him a split finger, struck him out, and I got a contract. So that's the way that works. Belief is fundamental to who we are, right? And to me, I think what it really means to be an athlete is to come to terms with this idea fundamentally is that we're conditioned to reach beyond our grasp, right? For the chance to feel what it's like to grasp beyond your reach. And that's the magic of sports, right? And that is the heart of belief and confidence and what that does to someone that's performing. But it also means there are a lot of times you're going to reach and your grasp is not going to get there, right? And so it's the whole mindset of being able to take a step back and realize the difficulty of what we're trying to do in the pursuit of perfection. And so that's the long answer for a short question.
So you have this choice. I think this is kind of I've found with my own work that sports is a great metaphor. Not only is it something that's practical, literal, but it relates, the audience will relate whether they've thrown a baseball or they've even participated in sports because it shows something. It's something that, like in that moment when you made that choice to go straight at him rather than play the safe route, that was a feeling, because I think that's a really important point, is that there's a feeling in that. And it's also symbolic, like you're crossing over into this space where you in that moment you could lose everything, right? If that's all you saw, you had this.
There's no question.
You have been great for me to understand this on a deeper and deeper level, of having this counterbalance. So you had that counterbalance in that moment to say, if he hits the ball, this does not define me, this one moment. You've gone on from that to help others with this. So how does this play out into the next steps as you move from sports into the next phase, which is, if you want to introduce that, I think that would be great.
Yeah, no, I think this is the critical point, right? And I think the fundamental, and I love the idea of metaphor, right? Because there's a reason why on every continent there's some, when it used to be a newspaper, but it all had a sports section on it. So there was something fundamentally deeper about what we're doing than simply throwing a ball and playing a game, right? And it all has to do with how one confronts life at the end of the day. And ultimately, it's about survival, right? The champion is the one that is the last one standing, right? So all of that. So I think one of the most damning misconceptions is that I cannot be anything other than one thing, right? That in some way it's compromising to think of two things. And, one of the things that I was told early on when I was playing baseball was, doing something so you don't get caught up in the saw blade of what it means to compete. It's because, we all have egos, but if we base our egos on our performance alone, you're on that saw blade of highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows. And I was, one of the manager I had early on was the idea of keep it above the middle and balanced. And to me, what that translates into is to having a keel. A keel being the weight that holds you into the water and stabilizes, and to have that kind of mass that stabilizes you through the journey versus being the little boat that rides every wave, because that's a very difficult path to walk. And then the threat of losing that thing that defines you can be existential.
Did you have any experience in your life outside your own career watching other athletes and seeing comparisons that really brought that to your attention?
It's a great question. For me, it was, I think, literally my father. I was lucky enough to be an athlete, and where neither of my parents really cared about what I did. And so my dad was always saying, well, why don't you, as I was in college, why don't you go look at what it means to be in a bank or, something. And so that was playing in the background, and then I think what ultimately happens for me as an athlete, and I think, the ultimate exemplar, as we both lean on, is Kobe Bryant, right? Because I don't think there is a greater example of how to walk the path. I think he's the ultimate exemplar. But once you see what happens to people, right? When guys get cut, teammates, friends, and the devastation that creates, to see someone who's really genuinely frightened of their future. It's something that, and there's someone like me in every generation, and I was lucky to do this early on, so there's been a lot of generations, but you can't help but see it. And then the idea for me was, I really want to understand the problem. Of all the work that I did, the one thing I figured out, or that I fundamentally believe, is the thing that keeps people from being able to adapt effectively is fear. And so the problem is just being so unfamiliar with something that you don't have any idea your greatest strength you can't employ, which is the ability to adapt. And so for me, it was just this long path that I've been on. You just see people who are more than capable, and you realize that there's this difference between where they are and where they could be, and how much more effective their lives would be. And this is the main point, is that once you do that, you realize that your reps you do to kind of broaden yourselves complement the reps you do on the field, because it's the same process, and it's being more familiar with the process that makes you a more effective, master of your own destiny.
So let's go back to what you brought up, Kobe. Talk through Kobe's journey.
Well, okay, so I can't tell you that I know him personally, but he's on tape quite a bit, so I'll do that, state that. But, he was, and I'm using, because I've done this so many times, his voice is in my head, which was this idea when he's 20 years old to suggest that I've seen what, to the point is I see what happens to these guys, and I don't want to be like one of them, right? And this is, so quite a few years ago now, when all the resources that through social media and whatnot are available to be able to go out and explore the world, he set out that he had to go look at and say that I am not this one thing, right? And he just classically did the things that you had to do to talk to other people, to broaden your horizon, leverage your your creativity and your imagination, and just talk to people who aren't part of your everyday life, and expand your horizons, and ultimately, but do so understanding that time is inevitable in any athlete's life. And I've seen 12-year-old young girls depressed because they had a knee injury and they can't play. I mean, this is part of the fundamental, aspect of the journey, and it is preventable. It is wholly preventable.
So are you suggesting that someone, just hypothetically, they set up meetings? Like what would be the steps that you would have someone
That's a great question.
through?
So to me, it begins with having your own narrative, right? What I would say is like, I am. Explain I am to me, right? And to me, what I think every athlete has, and the deeper you get, the more the greater the advantage. But it begins with a narrative that is built around the idea. I think there's 3 fundamental elements that constitute everything we do in athletics. And that's process, and that process is mastery. It's passion, because that's the fuel that drives that Formula One race car. And then it's relentless adaptation. It's taking that car around the track and realizing all the little adjustments that need to be made, being conscious and present, and to just relentless adaptation. And to be able to, so part of that narrative, or to me, I think a key element of the narrative is to say, explain your process. What made you the master of who you've become, right? And then explain the connection to passion. And the idea is that, so part of that discovery, because one of the things that I learned without question was that people who've done things want to help other people. They may not go out and volunteer that, but if you ask, they want to help, right? And because it's validating for them. And so, but you have to be prepared to be in a situation. So tell me who you are. What's your process? You cannot leave. If I'm talking to my son now, you cannot leave not understanding this extraordinary process sports has put you through, because it is what makes, it's all about survival and the pursuit of greatness, perfection, if you will. And then how that passion has to go with that, right? Because what I've also learned along the way is process without passion, particularly for athletes, is not very effective. And this is the key point that I think the ultimate point that Kobe makes is just how hard you have to work to find something else to be passionate about, because it's not easy.
It's almost, I would think early on, it seems almost impossible, because you're in love with this sport, and you can know conceptually, I need to find something else. Well, I like to go play golf when I'm not doing this sport. But then your career comes to an end. Does that golf replace the feeling, the passion? You used this word earlier, which I think would be good to hear you define, which is mastery.
Mm-hmm.
How does mastery work into everyday life, not just an athlete?
Well, mastery is, I think, without getting a little too wonky here, it's this idea of we, as athletes, I would argue we exist on a spectrum, right? We are in the role of role modeling for young people in particular, but for everybody, right? The first thing we do when we feel like, hey, I think I want to be a baseball player, we go find a baseball player that we want to, imitate, right? Because it's that I'm in search of, I think, what becomes this internal driver of my potential. It's the sacred virtue of athletics, right? And so mastery is this idea of differentiating between where I am and where I want to be, and then each measured step, which is the adaptation, to becoming greater. And the realization, when you've done it long enough, there's no such thing as perfection, because you can always get better. And so it's just this idea of navigating the pursuit of your own measure of greatness. And so it applies to anybody, right? But it's this sense of like knowing that I need to take a measured step. How do I do that? How am I going to get better? Understanding I have to reach beyond my grasp to get there. And that's that process of mastery that is, I think, so fundamental to who we all are. And it's something absolutely every athlete can lean on.
So we'll use Kobe as our archetype, so to speak, our example. And so Kobe, you said at 20, realized, wait, this could end at any minute. That was like a wake-up call. So he wants to develop something off the court, and it wasn't easy, as you've shared. He's going to play for the next close to 20 years.
Yes.
So he's playing on the court, but he's also in life, if you will, playing or searching. Take us through kind of someone that might be looking at this going, okay, why would this be an advantage other than another career path? How does this actually make me a better performer when I'm on the court of life? And then what's kind of the process that you know, because it didn't happen overnight. It took him a while, and it was very difficult. Yeah.
The idea of, so I think from, as he articulates it, right, it's this idea, and I think there's a couple things that go in front of this, right, which is the perspective of what this is. So it's very difficult to suggest doing two things at the same time. Doesn't make any sense, right? And so the idea of suggesting is that I have to do this as though it's funeral planning, right? Nobody wants to approach that. It's one of the primary reasons why a lot of programs have failed, right? But it's this understanding, this fundamental understanding for him that it was defining who he was, right? And, not what I am, but who I am. And to find something that on some level brought him this sense of completeness, right? And the beauty of him being in that position, one of the false mythologies is that I can't do anything. If I invest time in this, then that is going to be compromised. And that's just not true. And so, but he understood it because I think the object is that you're not going to, life goes on. And who you are and how you express and make the most out of life is a very different thing from the idea of saying, I got to have a job, I got to have a career. Then those are things are elements to it. But what every athlete needs to understand, and I think this is part of how the problem has been falsely defined, is that the challenge is we build a life around what we do, right? And this is the key point, is that you're not losing the opportunity, you are losing the opportunity to play your sport, whatever it is, but you're going to lose that way of life that goes along with it, everything that it's built around. So the ultimate task that he understood was assembling something that will be a place that ultimately becomes a sanctuary when you're playing. And this is a key point, right? When you have these things, and now how you smooth out the highs and the lows is when you have a place to go and say, you know what, I can take shelter here. I'm in a slump. The worst thing for a player, for an athlete, is to be in a slump, right? So how do you do that? You have a process. How do you back out? Because what happens when you get in a slump, right? You watch hitters, and by the time they're deep in a slump, it looks like they can't figure out which end of the bat to hold, right? Because you're just overthinking, trying to figure it out, that restless energy that comes in and trying to resolve that. Instead of being able to say, I can go here, unplug, remove myself, let things calm, let my mind go back to its rightful place, reinvigorate with the process itself, and then just flow through the solution. All these things are the benefits of being able to say, I am not just this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that. So you've worked with a lot of top people. We'll create the context of who these people are, especially when they were in a high profile position. So what would be a good example of, people that you've been able to work with, whether it's an individual or it's a group?
I think given where things are right now, right? So one of my favorite cases, right, was with a third line hockey player who was coming to the end of his career, right? And I think it's a fairly classic situation where, this was part of getting the Life After Hockey program, funded for the NHL. But so it was a test case, and I come across the Phoenix Coyotes, and there's this player that I'm introduced to by Perry Anderson, who was the person that was really pivotal in that whole process, but it was Mike Sullivan, who's the head coach of the USA hockey team here in the Olympics. And it's just it's an incredible story, right? Because, when I met him, he probably had this is our discussion, was that he's got young kids, and when you come to an end of a career, you have to get kind of inventive to stay in the game. And so he understood that he could, basically drag his family from one city to the next for the next 2 years. And he said, look, to quote, he said, I need to figure this out because I don't want to do that. And he said, my head is spinning and I can't make it stop. Right. And so it's
literally feels like his head is spinning. Like
that's literally what he said.
When it's all
and that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you're dealing with reality. When you're earlier on in your career, these are distant concerns, right? But sooner or later, and I think this is the case, at least through my own experience and what I see, but I think in every athlete's case, your competitive profile starts to go over the top, right? So now you're on the downside, and then all of a sudden this thing starts coming into view in the distance, which is the door, right? And it becomes real, then it just keeps moving closer and closer. And I think that's like a 2-year window that most athletes understand. And I would argue too that I think that's the minimally viable window to be able to go out and get the reps you need, because to go back to those 3 things, process, passion, and adaptation, it's the third one that requires time, right? You have to go through those reps. You have to learn from what they have to teach. And it's that process of discovery. But I think that's the minimally viable window of opportunity. So in Mike's case, it was just really interesting and kind of fascinating, because one facet of it was this idea of and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but going through the process. And part of the process was this belief that, I think I want to be a financial advisor to players, and then leaning on that, right? And then part of the process is, okay, it's explore the stages of this journey, right? So the first stage of the journey is exploration and discovery. It's not becoming it. So you have to go through the stages. And so he thought he had an answer. And the reality, the next stage is affirmation, right? Let's make sure that what I think, there's a lot of people I've played with, come up with an answer to the story, right? And so to go through that and come back to realize, like, wow, that's not what I thought. It's not what I thought it would be. He did an internship and came to the realization that that suggestion wasn't it, right? And then this one thing that he said, well, and I thought this was pretty funny. It's like, well, I consider coaching, but it'd have to be in Boston. And you kind of have to laugh at that because that's not the way the system works, right? But lo and behold, he gets an opportunity to be the minor league coach for the Bruins, and by the end of the season, he's coaching the Bruins, right?
Let me jump in and take this in an possibly interesting direction, combined with where you're headed. Why do you think some great players do not make great coaches? And why did Mike become a great coach as well as a great player?
I just think Mike understood. I mean, we had lengthy conversations, and and I'm having a conversation as from my vantage point, I'm a player, right? And everybody, I think, once you have some experience, you realize there's a good, bad, and ugly coaching options. And just to listen to him was, to me, all I could say is, man, I'd do whatever I could to play for you. And I can't imagine anybody that's a thoughtful competitor wouldn't want to play for him. And so, and the fascinating thing is, and the thing that, is to talk about belief, right, is he ends up, the following year was a strike-shortened year, new owner, they want a different coach. He's now not the head coach anymore. He's an assistant coach. And it takes him a considerable number of years before the knock on the door comes again. And so this idea of belief and is so central to the whole place, because you have to be willing to endure. And he did, and he's become, this extraordinary story in sports, to be able to go and get that knock on the door as he was, moving farther away from the idea of becoming a head coach again, to getting a knock on the door from the Penguins and say, we want you to be our minor league coach. And the exact same thing happened in Pittsburgh, and he ended up with a Stanley Cup. And then he did it again the next year. And I can't say that he did it, obviously, but they did it again. And so, and it's just extraordinary when, for me personally, to be, to have someone that I respect the way I do, to have that kind of success, and then have an opportunity to win a gold medal the way they did is just, it doesn't get any better than that.
So in your process, when you're meeting with someone, you have to care, right? It's not just you have a process. You're also invested in this experience with them, I would say, because you don't know where it's going to head. You're both exploring it together. So what is that like for you and what you do now? Well,
let me tell you, right? So almost all of my work was done with, is done at the professional level, right? So this means those players have been around. They've been hounded by what I would refer to, and I was told, that the best of the worst, right? And so all they want, right, is somebody who actually cares. Because the approach,
But care about them as a person,
care about them as a person, it's
not
an easy
a product.
that, and amen, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's all the difference because you're in a system, right? Where the system isn't about having an athlete have a wonderful life. The system is about using their talent, of which in this virtuous journey that they get to undertake. But they're the means to the end. They're not the end, right? And so to me, I think so many athletes, it's like everybody wants to be involved, to be at the banquet, right? But sooner or later you come to realize that you're on the menu. The banquet's not about you, right? And that is a critical point of understanding. But so at the end of the day, there is so much, that from a lot of different angles that I'm not here to help you, Seth. I'm here to help myself. But I'm not going to tell you that, right? And so the idea is what everybody wants at some point in time, because you float on a sea of insincerity, is somebody that actually cares. And if you actually care, as my father would say, action speaks louder than words. And that's, that to me defines a true professional in this walk of life, which is, it's not about me, right? And that's to me, so what's critical of the work that I've tried to do, and that's why I don't need anybody to really fly my flag, is that it's too much of coaching becomes what I did for you, right? And the idea of, to me, the most powerful form in the medium is to put that in front of their instincts so it feels as though they did it, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of things that I've done I would never get credit for, but to me, that's the point. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we bring back in some of the stories that we have, so we have Mike, we have Kobe. So Mike finds his lane, so to speak, as a coach. And Kobe, talk about the similarities of the two, of what Kobe was doing simultaneously on the court and off the court. And possibly he was doing some reps, as we kind of talk about, with others that, in other areas that he was, trying to find out if he was interested.
Well, I think because it's all this off-field development that has to take place, right? And that's just basically, it begins with being open-minded, right? And the understanding. And this is why the magic of all this is that you come to realize that these reps that what you might otherwise think are somehow competing with what I'm trying to do on the field, to become complementary, right? Because it's about process. And so the main thing is just having an open mind and a willingness. And I think one of my favorite examples that parallel Kobe and Mike would be that, Kobe is famous for making cold calls to people. And back in the day, the hottest person in business, Jack Welch, he was the CEO of GE, when GE was flying, I think, at its highest. And he was the alpha executive, right? The alpha CEO. And come to realize the first paragraph of his book was explaining how he was a hockey player. And it's like, well, why don't you give him a call, right? And so we kind of worked together and just called the front desk of GE, literally the front desk, and saying, excuse me, is Mr. Welch available? And as it turned out, that Mike got the opportunity to meet with him. But it just goes to show you, Mike was not Kobe, right, as a player, right, of that magnitude. But here's somebody who might otherwise be, thinking, well, what right do I have to call someone of that stature at the apex of his career and suggest he's going to want to talk to me? And so all you do is put the rationale together, fly the flag, see what comes of it. Don't be afraid of what reach beyond your grasp. And it did, right? And all these little things pile up, build up, and to provide a deeper sense of self and a deeper sense of ability. And because the ultimate expression of what has to happen, I think, in Kobe's understanding, and you see this with a lot of players now, is that all you're trying to do is look at each rep as an opportunity to gain data, to improve your process, to get better incrementally. And when you see it as data rather than some life or death trade-off, you just let it come, right? And that's the beauty to me of his approach. He understood. It got to the place where it minimized the emotional impact of something going wrong, that some way or another ends up getting us stumbling, tripping, on our own account.
So we had Mike meeting people through your help. We had Kobe doing the Kobe cold calls of just getting to know people and understanding where they're coming from. Let's say that someone's listening and they're entertaining the idea of, wow, I didn't realize I could be doing this now. What would be, if they don't have you in their life right now, what would be a really important question for them to ask themselves and then act on?
I think the only question that matters is, who am I? Right? Is this idea of like, what made me who I am? It's about talking about the journey and suggesting to anyone, right, that I've done this. That process is within me, and it will be for the balance of my life, right? I need to go find something I'm passionate about. And so to be able to express that, what that process is, right? This is the complementary nature. The more focused I am and capable of expressing my process is going to clearly be reflected on the expression of that process as it relates to the field. So they become complementary. Trey Hillman is a very dear friend of mine and managed a championship in his professional baseball. We were teammates, and so much of what I do is born of the many conversations we've had. And one of the critical things is to understand that you have to express, I think anybody who's an athlete, to be able to sit down with someone and express what made you who you are, right? And that's going to be the experiences that you had to go through to gain knowledge, skills, situational awareness. This is the one that is really critical, because in those three things inform decision making. So to practice decision making on the left hand and the right hand, at the end of the day, they're both connected, if that makes some sense.
So they sit down with a piece of paper and they start to ask themselves a question or a series of questions and just see what shows up.
So if you have a friend, the process begins with a parent, it begins with a friend, it begins with anyone who's willing to listen, and just let me explain to you who I am, what I'm made of.
Even if you don't know.
But that's part of the process of coming to know, right? But the central point is, tell me about the process that made you, because in looking for something else to apply myself, I have to understand how that process works with regards to whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do that, it's going to be very difficult for someone to look at you and suggest that you have this extraordinary raw potential that I want to use in my business or undertaking, because I need talent, I need potential. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So Kobe, in my world at least, we have seen some clips of him actually talking on this. He would say failure is a figment of your imagination.
There's no such thing, right? There's no such thing, because the idea of, I hate the term, right? To me, the ultimate failure is quitting, right? And that's not an absolute either. But the idea is that if you see it, everything is an opportunity to get better. You know, I've lived a long time, and one of the hardest things to come to grips with is that there are blessings in all things, right? We're not really wired to think that way. And that's what I think he ultimately understood, is no matter what. I mean, and the idea to suggest that, hey, to lose is exciting in some way because it's an opportunity to learn. And it's the conversion of attaching some emotional sentiment to information that you should receive just for what it is.
So we touch on this throughout. The feeling is guiding you, that passion, that feeling. So Kobe had a feeling about failure, of losing, that there was actually, he's gone on record to say it's exciting because you'll discover something.
Yeah.
And how important is that for everyone to understand?
Well, I think it's the shortcut to success, right? Because, and this is the one thing that I think I've come to really appreciate. There's two that I think are critical skills that every athlete has to ultimately embrace and ultimately work on. And the skill of fundamental creativity and imagination. Because what you are as an athlete, because it's competitive mastery, right? You're not trying to learn how to play the violin, right? You're trying to do something, and there's someone on the other side trying to keep you from doing it. So the creative, it is about creative problem solving, and you're a swimmer, right? Every athlete in team sports is ultimately an individual competitor, right? And so we have to figure out how to overcome the obstacles. That's the beauty of sports. That's the ultimate value of sports when, decades ago was come in, bring your child in here, and you'll get some socialization and some way to figure out how to solve problems in a collective format.
So you use the word creative. Now we're on the battlefield, so to speak. We're actually in the moment of competition. Where do we find that creativity under pressure? Is another main element. We got failure that we just talked about. Now let's talk about pressure. When there's something on the line, now we have pressure. How do you access that creativity when there's a part of you that wants to say, this is a matter of life or death on feeling level, and wants to go into the numbers and wants to go into the control elements, if you will, simplify the left brain versus the right brain. How does someone stay on the right brain, that sort of, curiosity, that creativity, if you will, the child inside, without giving my words to you?
No. But I think, this is what Eric alluded to earlier, right? Is it begins, right? I remember from my earliest memories is like, get your head in the game, right? And the connotation is this progression that like show up conscious, right? Your senses are all open and ready to receive information, right? Data that's going to signal what to do, right? So consciousness, and then critically presence. Like, so when you're there, that is the meaning of being in the game, right? And then the pressure is what smashes things together. Creativity requires the space to be able to make novel connections. And so all of this is conditioning, right? Conditioning your mind, and perhaps a little deeper than one's mind, right? To be in a space where that pressure, you're conscious of what that pressure is and the need to keep it at a minimal. So breathing, things of this nature that you can control to enable that creative process, because it's a very different process, but this also points to the value of doing reps in a different domain where you don't have those same dynamics, but you still get to exercise creativity. And so the way you do that is maybe it's harder to do in a game, but when you're the master, you become the master, right? You're seeing things, right? You look at Kobe in particular, and I think any meaningful, highly competitive athlete, it's all you're doing is you're looking for some competitive advantage. Kobe took it to an art form, a lot of people do, breaking down film, right? Looking for something, because there the pressure isn't, right? And then the idea is to go into the practice facility and do it until it's, you have the neural pathways established that you don't have to think about it, right? So I think dealing with pressure has to do with how you prepare for competition in a major way.
Now, we talk a lot on the show about the flow state, being in the zone, being in the moment, being present. I always love to hear your technical take on things. Not that you need to be technical. You can keep it simple if you want to. Maybe the connection of something beyond. So we've talked about belief, feeling and belief. The connection of something that's greater than ourselves. So it could be team first versus individual mindset. It could be God, let go and let God. And there's the spectrum of all those in between, and possibly things that I haven't mentioned yet. But where would you go with that? Because I know you actually were the one that was really pushing on, this is the answer. The flow state is the answer.
So trying to characterize flow, right? Flow is not something that you can just go, okay, but I'm going to go over here for a little while, get into flow state, then I'll be back in a couple minutes, right? It is something that to me just seems that there's an evolutionary echo of survival in there somehow, right? Because and not going into details, but I think the idea is it's the proximity to flow. So highly skilled, highly energized, puts you in proximity to that flow state that gets you closer to when those moments happen. And then when those moments happen, something beyond expression happens. And, it's like, and it's, as an athlete, I think sooner or later we all come by it in some capacity. And it's just amazing. But it's the idea, and it's obviously tremendous competitive advantage when you can, do things seemingly at will. And, but I think it goes back to preparation and the probability of getting, enabling that to materialize when it needs to materialize is being prepared. And I go back to Kobe again, and like so many others, it's like, I'll go do 1,000 shots. Curry is another classic example of that. It's preparation.
Okay, so I'm going to come in a different direction. And so I know that both of us really enjoy Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. People might be more aware of his influence with George Lucas and the Star Wars, at least the first 3 trilogies. When he says, use the force, trust the force, is he talking about the flow state, the zone? Is there a connection to mythology? And maybe introduce a little bit of what Joseph Campbell.
So to me, the hero's journey is a fundamental construct of what it means to be an athlete, a neurosurgeon, whatever it is, right? The point being is that we enter into this journey, right, that is heroic in nature, right? Because it's fraught with peril, and the ultimate intent is to bring something back to society through this cycle that begins with the call to adventure, right? It's like there's something is being summoned within you to go forward and but it's going to require you to cross this threshold. And that threshold comes with trials and challenges that you, in order to get to a level of this sense of belonging with what the intention is, right? What the object of the journey is. And so you just move through these stages, but it's this path.
And it's something that, so let's look at the context of mythology. We know it from school possibly, but why is there mythology in the first place? How does it serve humans? And, Joseph Campbell is this expert that studied not only mythology, but a lot of other ancient sort of storytelling, and to be able to distill it into something that actually, hey, you're not alone in this.
Yeah, and to me, this is just, and it, absolutely. So Joseph Campbell was a child of the Depression, and for 5 years there was no employment, so all he did was read. And what he wanted to understand in all these different cultures across the globe, what were the mythologies? The mythology is this, basically wisdom that is brought down through the ages to help people move through the present, right? And that basically defines its utility. It is there to help guide, right, your own journey by virtue of what this wisdom that's been being handed down. And so it's just fundamental element is to guide, right? And the heroic aspect of that is just this, is coming to understand that if you are in fact within this heroic journey, is to kind of realize, to come to terms with what exactly it is that you've decided to do, because it comes with challenges. It's not easy. It is going to pull something out of you didn't realize was there to begin with, right? But to understand that it's not just this, everything is up, right? It's up, down, all this. You have to prove yourself worthy of this ambition that you have, right? And what's critical is that to realize there are trials. And it doesn't mean that everything's going to work out, right? So you have to summon the determination to do it. Get to a threshold, right, that then changes in advance, you enter an advanced stage of the next stage of the journey. So from trials to belonging to fulfillment, and then particularly in athletics is the stage that is just largely not dealt with, which is letting go, because you don't get to stay. And then when you understand that the part of letting go has to be the part of that informs the next stage, which is your return. So it's where you kind of bring to mind and to the depth of one's soul this idea of that my worth from this journey is beneficial to society, and that's what in turn makes it heroic.
So if we use Kobe, when we talk about Kobe, we're not just talking about Kobe was this great example of training and all these in achievement. We're actually talking about Kobe as like a modern mythology figure, if you will, as an example. And one part that we both share our appreciation is his final game.
Yeah, it's absolutely
So it's kind of like
deal.
if we go back to your Conseco moment of like, am I going to pitch to him or am I going to try and play it safe and pitch around him? That's a defining moment in your life. You had that balance to be able to say, I have nothing to lose, I'm going straight at him. Mm-hmm. So Kobe has the same sort of, sort of presence and so take us through the
He
final
shatters
game.
and mythology, I think, is what's happened, right? Because you don't get to define mythology. Mythology is something that comes down, right? And is somehow generally accepted. And so Kobe, was a very real human being, flaws and all, right? But at the end of the day, he figured out a way through this that smashed a lot of standing norms about what things should be, right? So he stands out as far as the, the whole Mamba mentality and whatnot. But, the most important thing that I think for an athlete to understand was to realize that here's this guy that was extraordinary, that virtually anybody who's ever played in the NBA God knows what they'd give to have a 60-point game. He has a 60-point game on his way out the door, and as he did, just, okay, I'm going to work tomorrow. And I'm not going to work, I'm going to pursue the next stage. The return of that heroic journey now is to go back and be of service to society in a completely different way, right? And that's what he did, which I think is truly extraordinary. It's transcendent, and it's something that if any parent of a child, that wants that child to become something, is to look at it and just say, how did he do that, right? What the same questions you're asking, and connect in whatever way. But he is, I would say, arguably the most relevant role model, because he just crashed through this barrier and said, I'm taking everything this game has, right? And it's transformed me into something that will make me unstoppable. And that to me is the, exclamation point on his journey.
Yeah, and for him to finish and walk away at that high level, and then within, not that it's important to have these achievements, the gold medals, but he had the gold medal in basketball. Then within 3 years of retirement from basketball, he's now storytelling, and he wins the ultimate with an Oscar. And his process of winning the Oscar was no different than his process in basketball.
And that's just it, period, paragraph, end of statement, right? That's it. It's just the idea of sports is not the end. It's the means to the end. It's the place to go, challenge yourself, learn something about yourself, and come to understand that you can, if you can master this and find something else that you're similarly passionate about, you can practically do anything you want to do.
Well said. What keeps you going now? What's kind of the, we talk a lot on the show also about the mother of invention is necessity. So you're problem solving when you're out there on the baseball field. Now, what's the necessity? What motivates you?
I've been around for a long time, right? The exit doors within view, right? So I'm trying to take what I feel fortunate enough to have done, right? And I think there is a fundamental structural absence to be able to do what we're talking about and how to respond to the challenge of what are you going to do to make, not just have a great game, not great season, great career. The ultimate challenge for anybody, I think, alive, but in particularly from sports, if you get a certain measure of success, is you should have an extraordinary life. And that structural piece is missing. So I'm in the midst of working with an extraordinary group of people to produce some software that helps those reps off field materialize in ways that was unimaginable 2 years ago. And the whole point is it's all about the reps. It's all about the reps. And if you can't, to do this successfully for any one person, just to accumulate the contacts and all the things that Mike did and Kobe did and all this did are very difficult to come by. But with what is now possible, and what I would refer to that as the game within the game, right? To play the game within the game and to win it by virtue of, going to one place where those resources are accessible and have a plan and the interaction with through the reps that I need to have to be able to take what made me exceptional here and do it someplace else. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It sounds phenomenal, and
It's a cool opportunity. We'll see.
well, it's a place and a time, and I believe, right? I have faith, and I appreciate you coming here and spending time with us. Kind of my wrap-up area is a pep talk. Take on my last name, but the pep talk would
Dr.
be
Pepper? Decaffeinated or caffeinated?
Well, I can't go into that. Would be, okay, so the pep talk question is just basically, what would you give the pep talk to people out there that are listening? What's very, very important, or the most important? It could be a number of things. If you're in someone's ear, take a look at this, or do
if
this.
it's my last breath, right? And I've been around some extraordinary Hall of Fame championship coaches. And the thing I fear most right now about the community, and, I know my children were involved in athletics. It's like, it's strangling the fun, right? What I've seen, the people who succeed enjoy what they're doing, right? And so my commentary would be more directed at the people that define the culture in which sports is played. The idea that you can only play one sport, to me, is ridiculous, right? The idea that you will play one sport and you will play it all year long, right? Because every athlete, there's no one going to be harder on an athlete than the athlete themselves, right? And so as long as you're playing, you're going to be beating yourself up. And the idea to go out and play with your friends, play sports that they want to play, get some variety, I think is fundamental to feeding one's soul. And to me, that's where I think the emphasis has to be, to say, don't strip the fun out of this through what I think is potentially this conflict with a commercial agenda, right? And so those people I think it's incumbent on them to figure out how to bring the joy back into the game, because the joy of it is what, it's the elixir.
On the word joy, what's the performance enhancer of joy?
It's because it summons the will, right? It summons the will. And, when I was playing baseball, we would sit in the bullpen, right? Trying to figure out what to do at the time. And we just said, what is it that takes somebody from where we are, and like I was in rookie ball, and what takes somebody that got us here, right? And now we're at the steepest part of the pyramid, is getting from here to the top, right? And, and the one thing that was the ultimate determinant was determination, right? And so how do you summon the will to do what you have to do, to subject yourself to the grind of what it takes to pursue perfection? And, so it is, joy just fuels everything that's positive, right? And if you can go out and have, playing baseball, I think in any team, but if you got a teammate that knows how to lighten it up, it just makes it so much easier, right? And so it's I think it's incumbent on everyone to just find the joy in it.
Lighten up a little bit?
Lighten up a little bit. Lighten up, Francis, yeah. So.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing. I know this is a big deal for me, and to have this opportunity to kind of allow people to get to know you, because you are the quiet source behind. And so just to bring that out into the front, I think is really important. And if there's anything that you want to share as far as like what you're doing next, if there's any sort of thing that you want to promote connected to that, feel free to do that as well.
Well, if there is this thing to promote, I mean, it's the need for resources that, and I think resources dedicated to prevention, because that doesn't exist for the most part. And so I can't go into much detail about what I'm doing, but I think that's the ultimate thing, is anybody that's out there looking to, help people make the most of the opportunities they may have, that's just what if I can support in any way possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Do you have anything that we left out that you want to go over?
Well, yes. Do we have another 3 hours? No, I mean, Seth, thank you. That was great.
Thank you for coming